Welcome to What the Theory with Joel. I'm Joel, and this is the penultimate episode till the end of the year. It's been a long year for us doing What the Theory, and we're closing it off with part 2 of a 3-part series called Nothing at the Center. So if you check out the last video, which was Nothing at the Center, it's a discussion of Sartre's Being and Nothingness, which is a conversation around the fact that at the center of being, of humanity, is nothingness. So today's episode will be the discussion of bad faith. The next one is a discussion of the look, and we'll wrap up our conversation around the views that Sartre has on existentialism, and I'll also give my point of view on those things. I got a few comments from Nothing at the Center. A few people were just like, what the hell are you talking about? And it was very, I guess, technical. In a discussion of phenomenology, which is my bad. I should have done something on phenomenology before, but maybe just to give you a basic setup in a minute. The idea behind phenomenology was, how do you know what exists? What is there? What is being? And there are two ways to understand it. One is from science, where you take objective facts and try and remove your individual perception, your stance, and try and get an understanding of the rules and the logic of reality. The other, which is phenomenology, is looking at beyond appearances. So the beginning of philosophy had Plato saying that everything that we see is an appearance, and that the true reality is the world of forms, is the thing outside the cave. That we're in the cave of illusions and we just see what appears to us. The phenomenologists say no, all that exists is appearance. It's just that you can never get beyond a certain vantage point, which is you. And the discussion, Nothing at the Center, was me sort of trying to break down what Sartre meant, that nothingness is at the center of being. And by nothingness, the best way to understand it is all of reality exists as one solid unit. But as a human being, if you pick one thing out from another, so you say this skull is a skull, this table is a table, you're pulling this thing out of existence and saying what it is not. So negation, nothingness, what something is not, is part of a definition of what it is. And that is brought by you. When I say this is a table, for instance, and it's meant for sitting on, I am creating its essence, I am creating its purpose. So I guess essence and being pulled out of reality, so to speak, and making something stand apart. I'm saying that this table is not me. I'm saying this skull is not me. That's the first form of negation. That is the internal peace. So every time consciousness is looking upon something, it is consciousness of something. It has intentionality. One of my dreams is to end up in a sensory deprivation tank. Now, part of that is I have this thought that if you're in a sensory deprivation tank, your mind is not getting furnished by information from the senses. It is just you. And that might be really liberating, but also really terrifying, because consciousness is an empty thing. You're always conscious of something. If you're not thinking about what's out there, if you're not looking at what's in front of you, you are reflecting on yourself. And that's where the idea of there is a difference between I and me. So the difference between I and me is something I'm going to stretch out today when we talk about bad faith. So bad faith, which Sartre calls mauvaise foi in French. You can see why I dropped French, so I'm pronouncing it is terrible. But bad faith is his point of view that we are free. Humanity is free. And freedom consists in the fact that there is a gap between response and action. That you, at any moment, get to choose what it is that you're going to do. Your actions are directed by you. You're sort of the locus of initiation. And bad faith to him is when you deny that aspect of that freedom, when you walk away from that freedom. And there are two types of bad faith that he talks about, which we're going to break down today. The first form of bad faith has to do with the idea of facticity. So my facticity, if you remember the episode that we did on Heidegger, is the facts of your being. It's the stuff that is beyond your choice. The fact that you were born in a certain country, that you have a certain skin color, that you have certain physical attributes, that you belong to a certain family, all those things that are sort of contingent or incidental, that are beyond your control, that is your facticity. And the first form of bad faith is a denial of that facticity and you focus only on the other aspect of who you are, which is transcendence. Now, transcendence, if I'm to spend a minute talking about that, transcendence has traditionally been thought of as something that is beyond our apprehension, something that is beyond our understanding. The best idea is something like God. So God is transcendent. He's beyond anything that we can understand. But the challenge of that has always been that if something is transcendent and beyond our understanding, then we can't say anything about it. By speaking about it, you're bringing it from the sublime, you bring it from the ethereal into material. And so when he says we're transcendent, he's including the fact that our consciousness as a nothing, our consciousness as a gap, as a negation, by us looking out into the world and separating ourselves from nature, while at the same time understanding that we are part of nature, that transcendent piece is our freedom, that there's a sort of gap in reality. And the fact that you can deny that piece and only focus on your facticity, or you can deny your facticity and only focus on your transcendence. So the first form of bad faith is when you deny your facticity and only focus on your transcendence. It might make sense in an example. So an example of this might be the one that is utilized by Sartre in this example is of someone on a date, right? So let's say you're on a date, you're flirting, you're trying to, get to know each other. And usually the language that's used in that is you're not outright saying, I want to sleep with you or I want to hook up with you. It's more that, you're showing interest in the things that the person is saying. You're, focusing on their appearance and, all those other things. Now, to deny your facticity and only focus on your transcendence, a situation would be where you deny the fact that you have a body. He talks about a woman who's on a date and she's enjoying the desire of the partner who is in front of her, the compliments that are coming towards her. And then he reaches out with his hand to hold hers. Now, she enjoys that feeling, but in a way she acts in bad faith by pretending not to understand what the guy is trying to do. So she knows that in this scenario, he's trying to make the move, he's trying to, make sure that they're establishing a connection and he's moving beyond, the emotional barrier to the physical barrier by, instantiating a touch. And he describes it almost as she looks at her hand as though she has a hand, like she's some removed specter looking down upon this thing and pretends not to see the subtext beyond that. Now, in that mode, I think we've all done that. In a way, maybe someone likes you and they like you, but you pretend not to see that. Sartre would say that you're acting in bad faith at that point because you're pretending not to see that you have a choice to respond to what you're actually seeing, to respond to the interest that the other party has in you. You are simply, trying to deny the fact that your body is part of what is being measured, that you're denying the fact that this person finds you attractive. The facticity, I think, also is something that you might see in the positivity movement, where people deny that they have illnesses, or they deny, the fact that they, where they're from, their sex, their gender, all those things matter. They sort of elevate the choice above their physicality. Now, the reason for that being bad faith is all the choices we make, the freedom that we have, is constrained by the facts of who we are. So I don't choose sort of what happens to me, but I choose how I respond to what happens to me. By denying that fact of what is happening to me, that I have a body, that I have facts on the ground, I am denying my own opportunity to make those choices. The inverse, the second part of bad faith, you could probably look at as the denial of transcendence and the acceptance of only facticity. So the example he gives in that instance is of a guy who is a homosexual man. So he might deny his facticity by saying, I can choose not to be gay. I can choose not to be homosexual. And then when confronted by saying, well, you've had sex with men before, and it's like, yeah, that was in my past, that doesn't matter anymore. I am now moving on to being something completely different. Now, the question that Sartre has is that not that someone might have experimented and then moved on to something else. No, he's saying, but in that person's own subjectivity, they're using the opacity, the fact that their mind is opaque, the fact that in their mind there is a subjective stance that no one else can understand, and using it to shield themselves from something that is being said about them given the facts of nature. So in that regard, you're almost denying the fact that you have to accept you made those choices to be to act in a homosexual manner. Instead, you're saying, well, you know, the instances and things happened to me and I was misled, and, you know, because I was in this environment, this tended to happen. So my takeaway from that, an example that is closer to home, is when I make decisions, sometimes I've noticed that when I use I'm talking about myself as an agent, as the locus of control. I choose the job that I want. I choose the person that I'm in love with. I choose my actions in everyday parlance. But then there are times when things happen to me, and then I'll say stuff like, that happened to me. So when I use me, I'm almost like an object in the world. I'm a thing upon which other external parties act. And when I'm saying it is me who is acting upon the world. The question is, how can you be both I and me? And that I-me relationship is the way in which you're able to also speak to yourself. The last bit I'll talk about is self-deception. So bad faith is slightly different from self-deception because in the Freudian view, your knowledge of yourself is coming from your conscious, and then there's a subconscious where you hide things that you probably don't know. But the question is, how can you hide something from yourself if you don't already know that there is something worth hiding? So where does that knowledge reside? He says it's incongruous for someone to say that you know something where you are able to deceive yourself, because to deceive, there has to be a deceiver and that person who's deceived. But the deceiver knows what they are doing. So you can't necessarily deceive yourself. Instead, what he means is that we try and distract ourselves. We try and focus ourselves away from a certain portion of who we are, but we are always aware of it, that is always there. And those things show up in anguish and anxiety. So anguish is the feeling that of your transcendence. It's the feeling that you have to make the choice. Next year, for instance, I'm starting a course on data science. And the fact that I'm going to do that course, I've made that commitment now, but I have to do it. I have to make those choices. I have to make the time. I have to put in the effort. And so the anguish sits with me. The feeling that, I might get to that point and I don't feel like doing it, or I don't want to do it, but still no one else can do it for me but me. Anxiety is more just the dizziness that comes with, you don't know what's going to happen, like living in Uganda, you don't know when the regime is going to change. Every day I wake up and think, if the big man gets a heart attack today, what happens? Or I might have every intention to go and do my coursework. When I get home and there is no power, because umeme is always umemeing, you find that you still have an intentionality of what you want to do, but you're anxious about the fact that something might happen to you. And that is, I think, a big difference. Now, in everyday life, we live with anguish and we live in anxiety, and that's where bad faith comes from. The first form of bad faith, which is denial of your facticity, is a way in which you're able to have bad faith and deal with your anxiety. You're dealing with the fact that something might happen to your body by focusing on your transcendence. The other way of dealing with anguish is focusing on your facticity so that you can get away from the feeling that you are responsible for the things you have to do. The last thing I think on this point is to say that from Sartre's point of view, we have no excuses. That radically we have freedom. That yes, there are things that are conditional, things that we might think are determined, but in our everyday experience, from moment to moment, we are responsible because we have the ability to choose. Whether we take that choice or not still lies with us. And that's the ultimate responsibility that comes with freedom. And I think this is why Sartre views freedom as a burden that is given to all of us. And it's up to us how we carry that burden, either with grace or with grief. So thank you very much for tuning in. Check out the very last episode, which is going to be From Being a Nothingness, which is about the theory of the look. Thank you so much, and cheers.